Hello, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connections. Each of us has stories that help us to understand and to explain our world. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who have had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who have had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories that help us to better understand our world. And they help us to connect with each other. And Community Connections is about those people and about their stories. And I'm sure that you will enjoy meeting these amazing, amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Enjoy. Hi, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connections. And I am so pleased and honored that today's guest is Lizzie Allan. Welcome, Lizzie. Thank you for being a part of Community Connections.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's an honor, and we want to hear a little bit about your life story and how that's brought you to where you are today. And we were just talking a little bit about the crisis we're going through, and you were talking about the opportunities that come out of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that might mean, and maybe it means something for our community too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'm working in the field of therapeutic comedy, and it's a kind of marrying of serious therapeutic techniques. I work with group therapy, and then the self-expression and storytelling through the medium of comedy, which also helps to kind of free us up, open up to a bit more of who we are, and share that with the world for the connection that's on the other side of it. So this has been a very interesting time because I work with groups of people, and we've not been able to meet, and there was lots of things we were doing out in the community and out in the world, various comedy workshops with different recovery organizations and things like that we had in the works. And we were planning another course for our graduates, and it was going to be filmed and be made into a docu-series that we can show this kind of therapeutic course, sort of like the workings of a watch. So when COVID happened and we all got plunged into isolation, it was actually a very beautiful experience, because over the time of my own experience with life, with the many challenges and obstacles of life, I've come to recognize that when a door closes, it's best to just let go of that and look for the opportunities, look for where the other doors are opening. And so we very quickly got our graduates online and carried on with the community and the connection and the checking in. And they are performing, they've all been working on various comedy skits and sketches that they're going to perform next week. We're going to film it at a venue with social distancing, without an audience, and then we're going to play it online. But it's been a very, very powerful time for us as an organization, and for me as a person on my path through life, to recognize that actually we've been able to meet with so many more people who have otherwise been unable to get out of the house. And so that's brought us into this: how can we make this work available to anyone, anywhere? And so we've started to build an online membership area, which will house all the elements of what we do as a community, the comedy writing and performing skills, and then all of the connection and workshopping and togetherness and therapeutic processes that we can all do in kind of Zoom sessions together. So that's what we've been working on in the background as an organization, which is called Hilarapy, by the way. I just dropped that in. Yeah. And it used to be called Addictive Comedy, but we changed it because Hilarapy says more of what we do.
So I think you described that stories are in many ways how we make sense of our lives, and often how we communicate. And the stories in some ways, I think, make us human and make us relatable. And I think that's what you're describing. Can you talk a little bit. I think you were born, as I understand it, in England, in Bath, England. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to this community and the things you've learned along the way and things you can teach us from your experiences?
I don't know how much I can teach you, but I know that there's always some value in sharing our stories. So I grew up with parents who divorced when I was 2, and they both struggled with their own addiction and mental health and emotional health and spiritual health. I think it's important when we talk about mental health to recognize that it's a holistic problem. We often think of it as something that centers in the mind, but I think it's a combination of different factors that create what we now know as mental health issues. And addiction is also a mental health issue of some kind. Anyway, I don't mean to bang on about that. So I grew up with this, with parents who had struggled with trauma in their childhood, and probably their parents struggled in their childhood. We've all got the same kind of lineage of struggles in various forms. So I grew up and I started to kind of experience my own struggles with addiction and my own struggles with mental health stuff as a result of that. But I also had a really strong connection to recovery and the possibility that I could actually live my life free from my addictions. By the time I was a teenager, my dad was very much in recovery from drugs and alcohol, so he was quite a strong part of my life. My mum also, I experienced her going through her own journey of healing through various spiritual and alternative therapies that really, that she helped me along my journey as well. So there was always this kind of communication that we could get better, we could grow, that everything that happens to us is always an important part of who we are and who we become. And so anyway, so I went on, and by the time I was 19, I had terrible, consequences from my traveling and using various drugs that came across my path by, being a naive 19-year-old who was fairly wild. And I ended up in a psychiatric ward, being brought home, had to be rescued and brought home by my mum and put in a psychiatric ward. And I was there for, a fair amount of time, and thinking I was Jesus reincarnated, and, I was going to be a famous rapper and all this stuff. And it was just, crazy thinking and crazy. But it was also, what also happened, it was an actual spiritual experience for me, because I was learning a lot while I was mad. And, there's a lot to be said when the filters come off and the limited thinking comes off. There's a lot to be said about the power that we actually do have, access to through God, universal source energy, higher self, spiritual, whatever words people use for that. And so, I began my own journey eventually after a few more years of struggling and trying to control it. I was living a productive life, but I was living half a life because I wasn't properly able to surrender. So I would say I was living half a life until, finally I just had enough with my, this spiritual void that I was feeling, because I was still, smoking marijuana and relying, going back to these, I had beliefs that I'd created in childhood, from having, I'm not good enough, I'm too much for the world. And I always loved comedy. I loved comedy, and comedy and humor was a huge part of coping in our family. Like, we survived and we thrived because of comedy, and we laughed and we connected through laughing and comedy and joking. And so it was a very important part of my, I remember dreaming of being a sketch writing comedian when I was sort of 10. I looked at the TV of French and Saunders doing their sketch show, and I just said, I want that job. I want to do that job. And I couldn't, because of the way I was believing, the small limited beliefs I had about myself. I had this volcano in me that I wanted to do it, but I would sit on it for fear that I was too much, I won't be good enough, I need to be perfect before I show anyone anything. And these were just, these were just old beliefs that didn't serve me. So anyway, I got, by the age of 29, which is just over 10 years ago, I finally threw in the towel and I accessed a recovery program, and I began my journey in abstinence, which was a beautiful experience of meeting wiser people than me who handheld me and helped me through this spiritual work of the 12 steps of looking at myself and becoming open and willing to have a relationship with myself and other people and a higher power. And then through this whole journey, I went back to university and I studied comedy writing and performance. I went and I did various jobs before I even started my journey in recovery, which were great learning blocks for me, working with other people, working with groups, doing youth work, youth offending work. My work always brought me around other people. I've always found huge joy in connection with other people. That's been a very big part of, happy life for me. And then in my recovery, everything was just magnified. And I was just, because I was 100% in alignment with myself. And then I moved to, I shouldn't say it was just a quick jump, but I started to do telling my story through comedy. And it was taking all of these shameful things, all these shameful beliefs I had about myself. And I had to go through a process of looking at it. It's so hard to look at the stuff that brings us shame and makes us cringe. And I had to look at it honestly, and I had to cry about it, and I had to come to terms with it. And then eventually I was able to put it into comedy, and I was able to tell that story through stand-up comedy. And I learned through doing that whole thing that I hated doing it on my own. And I hated performing in comedy clubs and anywhere that we think of stand-up comedy occurring, because the atmosphere is very much like, you better make us laugh or we're leaving, or, we're going to drink and maybe talk over some of the stuff you're saying. And so for me, I saw this real need for a place for myself to perform, but also for other people to perform. And that's how I came across making addictive comedy. It started in England. I created a comedy night, which was at a dry bar in Manchester, which meant that we were attracting customers who were there to see the comedy, not drink and chat with their friends. And that they were the comedy that we were talking, the stories we were telling through our comedy. And I was working for a charity, a recovery charity, and I was covering a huge area. I was a locality worker, creating networks of support outside of recovery. So I was helping people build these beautiful things. And I was able to get funding from a drug and alcohol service to teach people stand-up comedy so they could tell their stories. So that was where the whole concept of hilarity was born. And I started to see that value, and it was just incredible. And then I moved here 4 years ago.
How did you decide to move here?
Well, I was studying, I was doing a research performance project at university for the final piece. Think of a dissertation. And my question was, can I use comedy as a therapeutic tool to smash the stigma surrounding mental health and addiction? Of course, you don't even need to do anything to work out. The answer is yes. But I had to do a lot of research and write a paper and do a performance, and then write about what I learned from that. And what I learned was I researched who's doing comedy therapy, who's using comedy as therapy. And I went out to, I found stuff in Canada, and I found particularly a guy in Vancouver who was doing stand-up for mental health. His name's David Granier, and he's doing a great thing of teaching people stand-up, and they're able to tell their stories through that. And so I harassed him and harangued him and said, could I do some work experience with him? And he was a little bit resistant, to be honest. And I know who wouldn't be with me hounding them, some strange person hounding them. And And so I did. I went over there and I spent a couple of. I went to one of his shows with see some of his graduates, and I went to one of the classes that he ran. And he has a great thing going on. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more. I didn't just want to do comedy therapy with them. I wanted to create a community around them, and I wanted to do therapy. I wanted to do actual group therapy. And then when I got to Canada, it was quite by chance that the only thing that could keep me in the country was a student visa. So I studied to become a therapeutic counselor. It seemed to be the easiest thing. And I did that with Clear Mind International. And it changed my life, even more so than my life was already changed. It took my life to another level, because it was during my work in my first, well, it's a 3-year course, but my first year was all about me. I had to do all the therapy on myself in group therapy, and I had to face those limiting beliefs. And I had to go up against myself in a way that I've never, ever done. And I had to get vulnerable for the very first time, you know, vulnerable. And that did 2 things for me. One, it changed the way that I have relationships with people, because I accepted more of who I am. And 2, I realized my creative life. I became much, much better on stage. I became a more full performer. I no longer thought I had to turn up completely perfect. I was able to come up exactly as I was in that time. And then through all of that, I've been able to show other people how to do the same. And it's, you know, it's something that makes me really happy to see amazing people go through this kind of hero's journey. That's what I call it, because when you do a stand-up comedy course, even if you're not doing any therapy, even, you know, getting up on stage and doing any stand-up, let alone stand up about who you are and what you struggle with, it's a hero's journey. And you see people come up against themselves, just how I came up against myself, and still have to come up against myself. That limiting thinking that we get, that you can't do it, who are you to do it, those kind of things. And then it's like, who am I not to? I have a light and I want to shine it.
Yeah, you remind me of Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. But the other thing you remind me of is that so often we see people who go into therapeutic endeavors as therapists who have studied academically but haven't. We learn life through doing, not through books. And it's nice to be able to combine the 2 of them to get a different perspective. And certainly the story of your life and the learning that you've been able to go through in a very visceral, emotive way, and connecting with people, and then being able to take all of that and apply an academic lens to it, and becoming, I guess, in some ways, much more holistic in your approach to working with people, the challenges and excitement of that. And in some ways, I went back and did my master's degree in psychology at a place called Cold Mountain Institute. So I had to do a month out in the wilderness in group work. And I did that and another 2-week sessions of that over a 2-year period of doing it. And it certainly helped me face a number of the challenges and I can't do it kind of things, just like you're describing. So I'm identifying with you on a lot of the journey that you've been on. So also, you've had some marvelous successes in terms of your therapeutic endeavors, Hilarapy with different people. Can you talk about the successes you've had and why you think those successes are there for people?
Yeah, I had a very interesting experience last year with my own journey. I was coming up against internalized homophobia for myself, because we were planning to, being in a relationship with another woman and having a child, and the possibility of having another child. And it was bringing up this huge feelings of self-rejection, and, you know, the kind of, and I decided that it would be really important to use my own work on myself and go through this process of taking this whole subject to stage. So I created a show last year called, I can't even remember what it's called now. Oh yes, Unexpecting.
Right.
And it was about the process of having a baby, making a baby the gay way. And it was, I was kind of reporting on my journey as I went through it. And then I took it to stage. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, but it was so empowering when I performed it. I did 2 shows, that was it. And then I walked away, and I just, for some reason, what lifted off me was so much shame that I'd been carrying my whole life, having picked up these negative things that people, I'd grown up in the 80s in England, you know, and that time there was always this, you know, stereotypical kind of horrible things that people said about gay people. So when I was a teenager and I kind of started to realize I might be one of them, it was a horrible experience that I just didn't want to face. So I shut it all down. And using comedy and taking it to the stage and sharing that was unbelievable. And so that really changed the way that I worked with people, because everything that I'm doing is kind of new. I'm beating a new path. I'm creating something that you can't find anywhere else, not like I'm doing it. So a lot of times I have to trust that, okay, let's hope that, you know, let's hope that this works. So having done it on myself, I started to realize this power of actually having people come and do the course and then come up against their self. Because what we get is people who come and do the course and then go, but I'm not funny because I'm shy, I've got social anxiety, I don't know, you know, this. And it's actually that exact thing that you should be doing comedy about. The things that you think make you bad, wrong, weird, different. Those are the things that make you funny, because those are the things you know best. And those are the things that translate best into an explanation that other people can actually relate to. And I had this one student that springs to mind that was just such a powerful hero's journey. She had really struggled with social anxiety. So she was incredibly shy, and she hadn't really shown up a lot in relationship with other people. And she came and she joined the group, and the group was really powerful. And we went through some different things, and she showed up. She began to tell us who she was, share with us, cry with us, let herself be held by the group. And eventually she, you know, she was trying to tell stories of, you know, when she went traveling and when she did this, and she just couldn't find the hook. And eventually she found that if she just played out what it was like to be socially anxious, it was incredible. And she only did a 4.5-minute set, but it was so funny and so powerful. She literally brought us into her world, which is what a good comedian will do. And she told us what her mind does at every step of the way while she's waiting for the bus. Where shall I look? Should I look at the sky? No, I might. Shall I look at the floor? No, that's rude. You know, the way the mind works. Now, we've all had an experience of anxiety or being self-conscious, even if it's just a tiny bit. And she communicated it so well that the whole audience were laughing. And afterwards, lots of people were going up to her and saying, thank you so much for doing that. But one woman in particular had since then reported that it changed her life to see that girl do that set. And she, this woman in particular, has been living a very successful life as a business person, but struggled to let people know that she was actually only partial hearing. So she was people always thought she was aloof, arrogant, but she really just couldn't join in the ways that everyone else was. And now, having seen this amazing performer do that sketch and that set, on her social anxiety, she's now wants to share her story through comedy, and has been working with me and intends to join in the future and show the world. And it's really our stories, linking back to what we were saying earlier, that when we do share our stories, not only do we realize we're not on our own with it, but we help other people who then go, you've just told my story, and nobody's died. So I guess it's all right for me to tell my story. And thus the world changes.
And you're talking about people feeling so reluctant to talk about themselves and what they're going through. And certainly going on a stage and comedy, I guess, really opens an opportunity to do that. As challenging as it is, it's a venue that's perhaps a little easier to adapt to than having to declare it to a therapist or a friend or somebody. Being able to have that where you've got a large enough audience to get that kind of feedback. That's incredible when you get that social support coming out of that type of. That's really powerful in terms of addressing things. Yeah. You got to be very pleased and proud with the accomplishments that you've made and the contributions you've made to so many people in this community and beyond this community.
Well, I I guess so. It's hard to take compliments though, isn't it? And that does sound like a compliment. You ought to be proud of yourself.
You certainly should.
Yeah. I'm really happy to do this work, and I'm always pushing for more expansion of this. I mean, that's our dream. We're opening our venue so that we have a venue that's healthy, where people can really explore some of this stuff and also enjoy a night out which is deeper than your average stand-up comedy. And there's nothing wrong with stand-up comedy scenes. That's not that I'm bashing those, because they have their place. But I think using comedy as a way to express our, vulnerabilities and shared humanity, you need to respect. You need to do that in a respectful environment. And so, I've learned, if I create my own show and invite my own audience and they know exactly why they're there, it's a much better night for me than it is if I just go downtown and start trying to make drunk people laugh while they're wobbling over with their flagons of beer while I'm halfway through a joke.
Yeah. So if you had the power to change one thing in our society and the way we address things in our world, what would that thing be? What would you like to be able to influence or change worldly?
I just love vulnerable connection. I'm a massive fan of vulnerable, being who we are, being authentic and showing up authentically. And I'm so impressed with the community that I live in today in Canada. It's where we live in White Rock and in BC and in Canada. I mean, Canada's a big country, but it's forward thinking, and I knew it was going to be much more forward thinking when I moved here. So I'm almost getting so much more than I ever could have wished for, and seeing the power of community in action, and learning a lot from my partner Elaine, who's a major player in the community. Just falling in love with the networks of support that exist out there. And if I could change anything, I would have more, somehow provide more visibility to the networks and wonderful things that are available to everyone who's struggling. So if you are struggling, there is 1,000 people around you right now, in right near you, that want to help you in your journey. And that's been my experience. So ask for help. Always ask ask the universe, can you please show me how to get out of this hole? If not, ask a friend, pick up the phone, ask anyone. But when we ask, then we can find an answer. And there is so much help, because people love helping. And just to know, and this is what I always think is so valuable to people to know, is that your story helps me. Exactly. Your story helps us. So however bad or difficult or horrible you think your story is, you telling it will change people's lives for a fact. And so that gives us so much power to go, it must have had a reason. I must have had a reason to go through what I went through, because now I can help other people who are struggling there.
I couldn't be where I am if I hadn't gone through that struggle.
Yeah.
Is it fair for me to ask you to tell a joke now?
I don't really tell jokes. I tell stories. I just tell you about my...
Is there a funny story that I should be asking you to tell?
Well, all my stories are fairly funny because of the situations I've got myself into, and I still get myself into. I don't, I don't know how I could. I mean, it depends what story you want me to tell you. I mean, you've heard some of my stories; they're pretty on the edge, aren't they?
They are, but I think I think it shows people who may be watching some of the ways that you work, and it shows another part of you.
Oh, well, I will tell you that it takes a lot of work to take something to the stage.
Oh, yeah.
It absolutely does. So for me, I also struggle with my dyslexia. I say I struggle with it. I live with my dyslexia, which means that I have to work really hard to remember my comedy. So I have to write it, then I have to edit it 1,000 times, then I have to take it to the mirror and I have to make sure that it comes out naturally. Then I have to memorize it, and then I go to the stage. And then if I have to do the same show a week later, I pretty much have to put in another 10 hours of practicing to get back up to it. Otherwise it's all gone. So I'm not actually that good at stand-up comedy. I know that sounds, I don't even know what it is really that stand-up is, but unless I work really hard, I can't. I could tell you a funny story, but I wouldn't want you to think that that's my work.
No, I think I love the name Hilarity because that just ties it together so nicely. Thank you so very much, Lizzie. It's been wonderful getting to know you a little more, and I think one of the things that I've come to believe is that that the accomplishments that people may look at, it's really the people that make the difference within that, and people remember not the accomplishments, but the people that have made them, and the accomplishments and contributions you've made to our community and more broadly are wonderful. And thank you so much for doing that. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, and happy to be part of this lovely community. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you. I've been looking with a couple of people at all the crises we've dealt with in the last century, and most economic crises, and most of them have just been how do we get the economy going? And I think there's an opportunity for us to do much more than the economy. We should be addressing the environment or a number of social issues coming out of it. In fact, I think the two examples after the Great Depression, Roosevelt came back and he said, we've got to come out of the depression, but we also have to find a way of finding employment. We have to find ways of protecting the poor and bringing the poor out of the desperate situations they're in. And we've got to make sure this never happens again. And so that was one, and they did some of that. They put some legislation in so it wouldn't happen, but Reagan took out the legislation, so it disappeared. But England, after World War II, that's when Medicare started.
Yeah.
And Canada got Medicare as a result of that. And it just came out of that crisis. And so what can we do in this crisis? What are the things that we can do? What are the opportunities? Crisis means opportunity. And so often we just get blown away. Maybe I should start it and we can talk about those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.